The crystal champagne flute shattered in my grip, sending shards and expensive bubbles across the marble floor of the Thornton Mansion's grand ballroom. All eyes turned to me as Eleanor's words hung in the air like poison. I suppose we shouldn't be surprised by such behavior given her background, she announced to the gathered crowd of Boston's elite. After all, how many of our children spent their 16th birthday in juvenile detention? My name is Lucille, and until that moment, I thought I'd successfully buried my past 6 feet under designer clothes and a prestigious journalism career. Mother, please, Julian whispered, but his protest was as weak as watered-down wine. My husband, always the diplomat, couldn't even look me in the eye. Eleanor's charity gala had been going smoothly until Catherine, her closest friend, slipped her a manila envelope. I watched Eleanor's perfectly lined lips curl into a cruel smile as she skimmed its contents. Did you really think you could hide it forever, dear? Eleanor's voice dripped with false sympathy. That we wouldn't eventually discover what you really are? The room spun around me. Those sealed records had been my shield, allowing me to rebuild my life after years in foster care. Now Eleanor had torn it away with the precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. I was 16, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. And those records were sealed for a reason. Oh yes. Eleanor circled me like a shark. Assault and battery, wasn't it? Such a violent temper. Fiona, my closest friend and fellow journalist, appeared at my side. Let's go, Luce. These people aren't worth it. But I couldn't move. The familiar shame of my past crashed over me like a wave, drowning out the whispers and stares of Boston's finest. That girl, Eleanor continued, addressing her audience, was beating another child with a metal pipe. Is that the sort of person we want in our family? Managing our charitable foundation? That child was trying to rape my foster sister, I snapped, my voice cutting through the murmurs. But I suppose context doesn't matter when you're trying to destroy someone, does it, Eleanor? The silence that followed was deafening. Julian finally looked at me, his face a mask of shock. He hadn't known. I'd never told him the full story. I protected someone who couldn't protect herself, I continued, my hands shaking. And I'd do it again. Unlike some people in this room, I don't abandon those who need me. Eleanor's face flushed red. How dare you? No, how dare you? I stepped closer to her, ignoring the gasps from the crowd. You've been trying to push me out since the day Julian brought me home. Well, congratulations. You've finally shown everyone what you really are. I turned to leave, but Eleanor's next words stopped me cold. At least I know who I am, dear. You're just a charity case playing dress-up in our world. I felt Julian's hand on my arm, but I shrugged it off. Where were you? I hissed at him. Where were you when she was tearing me apart? Lucille, Save it. I grabbed my clutch from a nearby table. You know what's funny, Eleanor? I spent years thinking I wasn't good enough for your family. Now I'm wondering if your family is good enough for me. Fiona followed me out into the cool night air, her heels clicking on the cobblestones. That was intense, she said, lighting a cigarette. What are you going to do? I watched the lights of Boston twinkle below the hill where the Thornton Mansion perched like a crown. You know what we do when someone tries to bury us, Fee? She raised an eyebrow. What's that? We dig. I pulled out my phone and opened my contacts. I'm an investigative journalist. It's time I investigated the skeletons in Eleanor's closet. Luce. Fiona's voice held a warning. Revenge isn't always the answer. This isn't about revenge. I scrolled through my list of sources. This is about justice. Eleanor thinks she can expose my past? Fine, let's see what she's hiding in hers. My phone buzzed with a text from Julian. Come home, we need to talk. I turned it off without responding. The night air felt electric with possibility, and for the first time since the gala began, I felt truly alive. You know what they say about karma, I told Fiona, watching Eleanor's silhouette move behind the mansion's windows. She's not just a bitch, she's also patient. Fiona took a long drag of her cigarette. Just be careful, people like Eleanor don't go down easily. I smiled, thinking of all the stories I'd broken over the years, all the powerful people I'd exposed. Neither do people like me. The sound of breaking glass echoed from inside the mansion, followed by Eleanor's sharp voice calling for Julian. I straightened my spine and walked toward my car, leaving behind the pieces of my shattered illusions about belonging in their world. Sometimes you have to break things to build them back stronger, and I was just getting started. You're going to want to see this, Fiona said, dropping a stack of old newspapers on my desk at the Boston Herald. 3 days had passed since Eleanor's gala, and I'd been sleeping on Fiona's couch, ignoring Julian's calls. What am I looking at? I pushed aside my cold coffee and pulled the yellowed pages closer. Society pages, 1985. Look at the engagement announcements. There it was, in faded black and white, Eleanor's engagement to Richard Thornton, Julian's father. But what caught my eye was the date, just 6 months after another announcement featuring Eleanor's name, this one about her summer abroad in Switzerland. Switzerland? I muttered, making notes. That's convenient. Rich girls and mysterious European trips were pretty common back then, Fiona said, perching on my desk, usually to handle delicate situations. My phone buzzed again. Julian. You should talk to him, Fiona suggested. I declined the call. He had his chance to talk, at the gala. Remember how well that went? He's still your husband. Is he? Because it felt like he was just Eleanor's son that night. I started typing searches into our newspaper's archive database. Eleanor in Switzerland, 1985. There has to be something here. Lucille? A familiar voice made me freeze. Julian stood in the doorway of the newsroom, looking exhausted. How did you get in here? I told security I was bringing my wife lunch. He held up a paper bag from our favorite deli. Can we talk? Fiona squeezed my shoulder and disappeared, leaving us alone in my corner of the newsroom. You haven't been home in 3 days, Julian said, setting the bag down. Really? I hadn't noticed. I was too busy thinking about how my husband stood there while his mother aired out my sealed juvenile records. I didn't know she was going to do that. But you didn't stop her either, did you? I turned back to my computer. You never stop her. What are you working on? He peered at my screen. I minimized the window. A story. About my mother? About the truth. I finally looked at him properly. Did you know your mother spent 6 months in Switzerland the year before she married your father? His brow furrowed. What does that have to do with anything? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. I stood up, gathering my notes. But since she's so interested in exposing people's pasts, I thought I'd return the favor. Lucille, stop. He grabbed my arm. This isn't you. You're not vindictive. I yanked away from him. You don't know what I am. You proved that when you stood silent at the gala. I was shocked. I didn't know about what happened when you were 16. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was trying to be who your mother wanted me to be. The words exploded out of me. Perfect, polished, without a past. But guess what? My past made me who I am, and I'm done apologizing for it. My phone rang again, this time an unknown number. I answered it, grateful for the interruption. Is this Lucille? An elderly woman's voice crackled through the line. I worked at the Alpine Rest Home in Geneva during the 1980s. I saw your inquiry about Eleanor Thornton. Julian watched as I grabbed a pen. Yes, this is Lucille. What can you tell me? There are records from that time, but I can't discuss them over the phone. Can we meet? I agreed to a meeting at a local cafe, my heart racing. When I hung up, Julian was staring at me. What are you hoping to find? He asked quietly. The truth. Isn't that what journalists do? And what if the truth hurts more people than just my mother? I thought about Eleanor's smug face as she revealed my past, about all the times she'd made me feel small and unworthy. Then maybe she should have thought about that before she decided to destroy me. She didn't destroy you, Julian said. You're stronger than that. You're right, I am. I gathered my things, strong enough to find out what your mother is hiding. And what about us? His voice cracked slightly. What happens to our marriage while you're on this crusade? I paused at my desk, looking at our wedding photo. We looked so happy, so unaware of the storms ahead. That depends on you, Julian. Are you ready to face the truth about your family? Or are you going to keep standing silently by your mother's side? He didn't answer, and I didn't wait for him to find the words. I had a meeting to get to, and possibly the first real lead in unraveling Eleanor's perfect facade. As I left the newsroom, Fiona fell into step beside me. Where are we going? To meet someone who might know what really happened in Switzerland. I checked my watch. And Fiona, I think we're about to find out why Eleanor is so obsessed with other people's secrets. You know this could blow up in your face, right? I thought about Eleanor's words at the gala. At least I know who I am. Maybe, I said, hailing a cab, but sometimes the truth has to explode before it can set you free. The cafe was nearly empty when Maria, the former Alpine rest home nurse, spread the documents across our table. Her hands trembled as she pointed to a faded admission form. Eleanor arrived in April 1985, she said, her Swiss accent still strong after decades in America. Pregnant, scared, and using her maiden name. Fiona, sitting beside me, leaned forward. And the father? A musician, David, he played at the symphony. Maria's eyes clouded with memory. Eleanor's family didn't approve. He wasn't from their world. My hands shook as I photographed the documents. What happened to the baby? A boy, born in September. Maria pulled out a birth certificate. She named him Malachi, but she never held him, never even looked at him. The irony hit me like a punch to the gut. Eleanor, who'd spent years judging my background, had abandoned her own child. Where is he now? I asked. Last I heard, he was in Philadelphia. Maria wrote an address on a napkin. He works as a music teacher, like his father. My phone buzzed. Julian again. This time I answered. Where are you? He demanded. Working on a story. Mother's having a breakdown. Catherine told her you've been asking questions about Switzerland. I watched Maria gather her documents. Tell Eleanor I'd like to talk to her, about Malachi. The line went silent. Then, who's Malachi? Ask your mother. I hung up and turned to Maria. Why are you helping me? She clutched her purse, looking suddenly older, because I was there when she left him, when she chose her perfect life over her own child. Some things you can't forget. Back at the office, Fiona and I dug deeper. Social media revealed Malachi had a daughter who'd had a child of her own, a 6-year-old named Hayden. Look at this, Fiona said, pointing to a GoFundMe page. Hayden needs surgery. They're trying to raise money. I stared at the photo of a small girl with Eleanor's eyes. How much? $200,000. They've raised less than 10. My desk phone rang. Eleanor. You vicious little girl, she hissed when I answered. How dare you dig into my private affairs? Private affairs? I laughed bitterly. Like my sealed juvenile records? That was different. Why? Because it was about me? Because I'm just some foster kid who married above her station? You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You abandoned your son because he would have ruined your perfect image. Then you spent years making me feel worthless because of my background. I gripped the phone tighter. Well, guess what, Eleanor? Your background isn't so spotless after all. If you publish this, you'll what? Reveal more about my past? Go ahead. I'm not ashamed anymore, are you? The line went dead. Minutes later, Julian burst into the newsroom. Is it true? He demanded. I handed him the birth certificate. Congratulations, you have a brother. He sank into a chair, face pale. Why wouldn't she tell me? Because Eleanor Thornton cares more about appearances than people. I showed him Hayden's GoFundMe page. That's your niece's daughter. She needs surgery they can't afford. Julian stared at Hayden's photo. She looks like Mother. She does. I sat across from him. Julian, I'm going to Philadelphia tomorrow. I'm going to meet Malachi. I'll come with you. No. I shook my head. I need to do this alone. Why are you doing this, Lucille? Really? I thought about the scared 16-year-old I'd been, fighting to protect someone weaker. Because someone needs to stand up to her. Because that little girl deserves a chance. Because the truth matters. And revenge doesn't hurt. Maybe it does. I looked at him steadily. But this isn't just about revenge anymore. My phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. This is Malachi. Maria gave me your number. She said you know about Eleanor. I showed Julian the message. His hands were shaking. What are you going to do? He asked. I'm going to meet your brother. I gathered my things, and then I'm going to write the story Eleanor never wanted told. You'll destroy her. No, I said, thinking of Hayden's photo. I'm going to make her face what she's done, maybe for the first time in her life. As I left the newsroom, another text came through, from Eleanor. Name your price. Everyone has one. I thought about the 16-year-old girl who'd fought back with a pipe, about the woman who'd spent years trying to prove herself worthy, about the journalist who'd finally found her voice. Some things aren't for sale, I texted back. Some truths need to be told. Tomorrow, I'd meet Malachi. Tomorrow, I'd see the life Eleanor had thrown away. Tomorrow, the perfect facade would crack. But tonight, watching Boston's lights twinkle through my office window, I realized this story had become about more than revenge. It had become about justice, about family, about the choices we make and the lies we tell ourselves. And somewhere in Philadelphia, a little girl with Eleanor's eyes needed help that her great-grandmother could easily provide, if only she'd acknowledge her existence. The Philadelphia row house needed paint, and the steps creaked under my feet as I approached the door. Before I could knock, it swung open, revealing a man with Eleanor's high cheekbones and penetrating gaze. "Lucille?" Malachi's voice was deeper than I expected. "You look exactly like your profile picture, and you look exactly like your mother." He flinched. "Come in, watch the toys. Hayden's been crafting." The living room was cluttered but warm, with a piano against one wall and crayon drawings taped everywhere. A small girl lay on the couch, her complexion pale, watching cartoons. "That's Hayden," Malachi said softly. "She's having a rough day." "Hi, Hayden," I waved. She managed a weak smile before turning back to her show. "Coffee?" Malachi led me to the kitchen, where a young woman was washing dishes. "This is Ashley, my daughter." Ashley dried her hands quickly. "Did Eleanor send you?" "No," I said. "Eleanor doesn't know I'm here." "Of course not." Ashley's laugh was bitter. "Why would she care about us now?" Malachi poured coffee into chipped mugs. "Why are you here, Lucille?" I pulled out my notebook. "Because I'm a journalist, and I think this story needs to be told." "Our story or hers?" "Both." I took a sip of coffee. Eleanor humiliated me at a charity gala last week, exposed my juvenile records, made me feel worthless because of my background. "Sounds like her," Ashley muttered. "Then I started digging," I continued. "Found out about you, about Hayden." A crash from the living room interrupted us. Hayden had dropped her water glass, and now she was crying. "I'm sorry," she whimpered as Ashley rushed to clean up. "I got dizzy." "It's okay, baby." Ashley scooped her up. "Time for your medicine anyway." I watched them disappear upstairs, then turned to Malachi. "The GoFundMe page said she needs surgery?" He nodded, slumping into a chair. "Congenital heart defect. The procedure has an 85% success rate, but—" He spread his hands helplessly. "Insurance won't cover it. Experimental, they say." $200,000, I said. "That's nothing to Eleanor." "We tried contacting her." Malachi's voice was tight. "Multiple times over the years. Even before Hayden got sick, she had her lawyer send cease and desist letters." My phone buzzed. "Julian." "Where are you?" I ignored it. "What if I could make her listen?" "By publishing the story?" Malachi shook his head. "You think shame will make her help us?" "I think the truth is powerful." "The truth?" He stood abruptly, moving to the piano. His fingers traced the keys without pressing them. "The truth is, I spent my whole life wondering why I wasn't good enough. Why my father's music and my mother's reputation were worth more than me." "Malachi." "The truth is, my daughter grew up without a grandmother, and now my granddaughter might die because that same grandmother won't acknowledge we exist." He played a soft, haunting chord. "That's the truth, Lucille. But will it help Hayden?" Ashley returned, looking exhausted. "She's asleep." "How long does she have?" I asked quietly. "Doctors say 6 months, maybe less without the surgery." Ashley's voice cracked. "We're running out of options." My phone buzzed again. Eleanor this time. "Whatever they told you is a lie. Don't ruin everything over nothing." I showed Malachi the text. He laughed without humor. "Nothing. That's what we've always been to her." I took a photo of Hayden's drawings on the wall, of the piano, of the medicine bottles lined up on the kitchen counter. "Let me tell your story. And if it makes things worse?" "How could it be worse?" Ashley demanded. "We're already invisible to her." Malachi played another chord, this one angry and discordant. "You know what I remember most about growing up? The nuns at the children's home would play piano with me, said I had my father's gift. He looked at me. Did she ever mention him? David? Only that he was a musician. He died last year, never knew about me either. His fingers found a melody, sad and sweet. Eleanor made sure of that. I stood up, decision made. I'm having dinner with Julian tonight, first time since the gala. I'm going to tell him everything. Your husband, Malachi said. My brother. That's strange to say. He should know his niece, his great niece. I gathered my things. Eleanor's had decades to do the right thing. Now she's run out of time. Ashley hugged me suddenly. Thank you for seeing us. As I left, Hayden appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas. Are you going to help us? She asked sleepily. I looked at this little girl with Eleanor's eyes and David's musical fingers, this child who deserved so much more than silence and denial. Yes, I promised. I'm going to help. Outside, I finally answered Julian's text. Coming home now. We need to talk about your niece and about doing what's right, even when it hurts. The truth was about to shatter Eleanor's perfect world. But sometimes I thought, watching Malachi wave goodbye from his doorway, things need to break before they can heal. I invited your mother to dinner, I told Julian as I walked into our apartment for the first time in over a week. He was setting the table. 3 places. I know. She's on her way. He paused, wine bottle in hand. She thinks this is a negotiation. It's not. I gathered that from your text about my niece. He poured 3 glasses. Tell me about them, about Malachi. I pulled out my phone, showed him the photos. He's a music teacher, plays piano like his father, has a daughter named Ashley and Hayden. Julian studied the little girl's picture. She's sick? Very. The surgery she needs? The doorbell rang. Julian squeezed my hand before opening it. Eleanor swept in wearing diamonds and disdain. Well, let's get this over with. How much do you want? Sit down, Mother, Julian said firmly. And for once in your life, listen. Her eyebrows shot up at his tone, but she sat. I placed my phone on the table, Hayden's photo facing her. That's your great-granddaughter, I said. She has 6 months to live without surgery. Eleanor's hand trembled as she reached for her wine. I told you, whatever they said, stop. Julian's voice cracked. I saw the birth certificate. I saw the documents. I know about David, about Switzerland, about everything. You don't understand? Then help us understand, I cut in. Help us understand how you could abandon your own child, then spend years judging me for my background. It was different then, Eleanor whispered. My family, our position in society. And now? I pushed Hayden's photo closer. What's your excuse now? She needs surgery. Surgery you could easily pay for. You can't just appear after decades and demand money. Like you appeared at the gala and exposed my past? I leaned forward. The difference is, I'm not ashamed of protecting my foster sister. Are you ashamed of abandoning your son? Eleanor stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. I don't have to listen to this. Yes, you do. Julian blocked her path. I met Malachi today. Called him while Lucille was there. He's my brother, Mother. My brother. Julian. He plays piano beautifully, he continued, like Dad always wanted me to. He has your eyes, your smile, and his daughter, my niece. She has a little girl who's dying. Eleanor's composure cracked. I never meant... To what? I asked. To have him find out? To face the consequences? To admit that you're not perfect? She sank back into her chair. You don't know what it was like. My family would have cut me off. David was nobody, a musician living in a basement apartment. And that justified abandoning your child? Julian's voice was ice, making him grow up wondering why he wasn't wanted. I gave him a better life. Better? I pulled up another photo on my phone, Malachi's shabby row house. He struggles to pay rent. His granddaughter needs life-saving surgery. How is that better? Eleanor stared at the wine in her glass. What do you want from me? I want you to look at what you've done, I said. Really look. I want you to face the truth like I had to face mine at your gala. And then what? You'll publish everything? Destroy our family's reputation? Julian laughed bitterly. Our reputation? Mother, you destroyed our family when you abandoned my brother. When you lied to Dad, to me, to everyone. The surgery cost $200,000, I said quietly. That's less than your annual charity donations, less than your jewelry collection, less than what you offered to pay me to keep quiet. Eleanor's hand shook as she reached for Hayden's photo. She looks like David, she whispered. She's 6 years old, Julian said. The same age I was when you told me I had to be perfect because we were Thorntons. Was that when you decided your first child wasn't perfect enough? Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks, smearing her expensive mascara. I was young, scared. So was I said, when I hit that boy to protect my foster sister. But I owned it. I lived with the consequences. What do you want me to do? Be better, Julian said simply. Be the mother you pretended to be all these years. Help your great-granddaughter live. Eleanor stood again, steadier this time. I need time to think. Hayden doesn't have time, I said, and tomorrow I'm writing the story, all of it. She paused at the door. You really met him? Malachi? Yes, Julian answered. He's a good man, Mother, despite everything. After she left, Julian and I sat in silence, the untouched dinner growing cold between us. Will she help? He finally asked. I thought about Eleanor's face when she saw Hayden's photo, the crack in her perfect mask. I don't know, but tomorrow everyone will know the truth, and sometimes that's the first step toward doing the right thing. Julian reached for my hand across the table. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you at the gala. I know. I squeezed his fingers. But you're standing up now, for all of us. Outside, a car started. Eleanor leaving our neighborhood, leaving the truth we'd forced her to face. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight, something had shifted. Sometimes healing starts with breaking apart. She's here, Fiona hissed, peering through the newsroom blinds. And she brought her lawyer. I kept typing, the story about Eleanor's abandoned son flowing through my fingers. Let them come. Eleanor burst through the door, her lawyer trailing behind with a briefcase. $1 million, she announced, dropping a document on my desk. Sign this non-disclosure agreement, and the money is yours. I didn't even look up from my screen. Not interested. $2 million, then. Her voice shook. Think about what you could do with that money. Now I did look up. You mean like pay for your great-granddaughter's surgery 10 times over? The lawyer cleared his throat. Ms. Eleanor is prepared to be generous. Generous? I laughed. She's trying to buy my silence. Again, just like she probably bought everyone else's silence over the years. You don't understand what's at stake, Eleanor said. Actually, I do. I turned my monitor so she could see the draft. Your reputation, your social standing, your perfect image. But what about what's at stake for Hayden? Don't publish this. It wasn't a demand anymore. It was almost a plea. My phone buzzed. A text from Ashley. Hayden's in the hospital. Her heart. Please hurry. I showed Eleanor the message. Still want to talk about money? She sank into the chair across from my desk, her lawyer hovering uncertainly. What do you want from me? I want you to be human, I said. I want you to acknowledge your son, help your great-granddaughter, and stop pretending you're better than everyone else because of your bank account. If this gets out, it's getting out. I turned the monitor back. I checked the time, 2 hours. Unless you come with me to Philadelphia, right now. See Hayden for yourself. Be a grandmother, a great-grandmother. Be something real for once in your life. The lawyer stepped forward. Ms. Eleanor, I advise against— Shut up, Robert. Eleanor stood, straightening her spine. Call Julian. Tell him to meet us there. The drive to Philadelphia was tense. Eleanor sat in my passenger seat, staring out the window, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief. David used to play at a cafe near here, she said suddenly as we entered the city. That's where we met. He had the most beautiful hands. Malachi has his hands, I said, and his talent. We pulled up to the hospital just as Julian arrived. Ashley met us in the lobby, her eyes red from crying. She's stabilized, Ashley said, but the doctor says we can't wait much longer for the surgery. Eleanor stepped forward, her designer heels clicking on the linoleum. Take me to her. Ashley hesitated, looking at me. I nodded. The pediatric cardiac unit was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors. Hayden lay in a bed too big for her small frame, tubes and wires everywhere. Malachi sat beside her, humming softly. He looked up as we entered. Mother. Eleanor stopped short, one hand flying to her throat. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Hayden opened her eyes. Are you my other grandma? She asked weakly. Something broke in Eleanor's face. She moved to the bed, her hands trembling as she reached for Hayden's small fingers. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I am. Daddy says you play piano too. Eleanor looked at Malachi, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time since she'd handed him to the nuns. Your father played beautifully. I know. Malachi's voice was rough. The nuns told me about him. They didn't tell me about you. Because I asked them not to. Eleanor's shoulders slumped. Because I was a coward. Julian stepped forward. We can't change the past, Mother. But we can fix this. Now. Eleanor straightened up, her society mask sliding back into place. Of course. Robert, call the hospital administrator. I want to arrange payment for the surgery immediately. Just like that? Ashley asked. Just like that. Eleanor squeezed Hayden's hand. No more waiting. I pulled out my phone, opened my email where the story sat ready to send. And Malachi? Eleanor turned to her son, tears finally falling freely. I can't undo what I did. I can't give you back your childhood. But if you'll let me, I'd like to know my son. Malachi's hands, David's hands, moved restlessly in his lap. It won't be easy. No, Eleanor agreed, but I'm tired of easy, tired of perfect, tired of pretending. I deleted the draft. Some stories, I realized, don't need to be published to change lives. Hayden tugged at Eleanor's sleeve. Will you play piano with Daddy and me? When I'm better? Eleanor looked at Malachi, a question in her eyes. He nodded slowly. We can try. Outside the hospital room, Julian pulled me close. Thank you, he whispered, for forcing us all to face the truth. I watched through the window as Eleanor tentatively sat beside Malachi, as they both reached for Hayden's hands, as decades of silence began to crack and heal. Sometimes, I thought, the best revenge is forcing someone to become better than they were. 3 weeks after Eleanor paid for Hayden's surgery, I stood in the back of the Thornton Mansion's ballroom, the same room where she'd exposed my past. But tonight was different. Tonight was about healing. Ready? Julian squeezed my hand as Eleanor approached the microphone. The room fell silent. Boston's elite waited expectantly for their annual charity gala speech, but Eleanor wasn't wearing her usual mask of perfection. Her hands shook as she adjusted the microphone. For 30 years, she began, I've stood here talking about helping children in need, all while ignoring my own child. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Catherine, who'd given Eleanor my juvenile records, nearly dropped her champagne. Many of you were here 3 weeks ago when I publicly shamed my daughter-in-law for her past. Eleanor's voice cracked. I did it because I thought I was protecting our family's reputation. In reality, I was protecting my own lies. She gestured to the side of the stage where Malachi stood with Ashley. This is my son, Malachi. I abandoned him in Switzerland before marrying Richard. I chose reputation over love, society over family. The whispers grew louder. Julian's arm tightened around my waist. But someone, Eleanor looked directly at me. Someone brave enough to stand up to me, showed me that our past actions don't define us. How we make them right does. Malachi stepped forward, and for the first time I saw Eleanor's perfect posture in his stance, her determination in his jaw. My daughter Ashley and I never asked for money or status, he said clearly. We only wanted acknowledgement, family. But my daughter's child, my granddaughter Hayden, needed help. Help that her great-grandmother finally provided. Eleanor wiped a tear. Tonight's charity gala isn't just about raising money. It's about truth, about family, about second chances. The ballroom doors opened and Hayden walked in, still pale but stronger after her surgery. She carried her violin, a gift from Eleanor. This is my great-granddaughter, Eleanor announced proudly, and she's going to play for you tonight, with her father, my son. Malachi sat at the grand piano as Hayden tucked her violin under her chin. The first notes of their duet filled the room, the same melody I'd heard him play in his Philadelphia row house, but fuller now, healing. Beautiful, isn't it? Fiona appeared beside me, camera in hand. Better than any exposé we could have written. Sometimes the truth doesn't need to be printed, I said. Sometimes it just needs to be lived. The music swelled, and I watched Eleanor's face as she saw her son perform for the first time. Saw the moment she realized what she'd thrown away, what she'd nearly lost forever. When the duet ended, the applause was deafening. Hayden beamed, bowing like Eleanor had taught her. Malachi stood, accepting the recognition he'd been denied for so long. Eleanor returned to the microphone. Tonight's donations will establish the David Song Foundation, providing musical education and medical care to children in need. Because no child should be denied their music, their health, their family. After the speech, Catherine approached me, wringing her hands. Lucille, I never meant... Yes, you did. I sipped my champagne. But I should thank you. Your cruelty led to this moment. Eleanor was surrounded by society women, but for once she wasn't bragging about designer labels or summer homes. She was showing them pictures of Hayden's first piano lesson, of Malachi's music school, of the family she'd finally allowed herself to love. Mrs. Thornton, a reporter called out, will you comment on the rumors about your time in Switzerland? Eleanor straightened her shoulders. My greatest shame isn't what happened in Switzerland. It's that I spent 30 years denying my own child to maintain an image that meant nothing compared to family. The reporter scribbled frantically. And your daughter-in-law's past? Is exactly that, the past. Lucille taught me that protecting those we love is never something to be ashamed of. Later, as the gala wound down, I found Malachi at the piano, playing softly. Thank you, he said without looking up, for not publishing the story, for giving her a chance to choose truth on her own. She needed to face it herself, I said. We all did. Hayden ran up, her dress swishing. Daddy, Grandma Eleanor says we can live here, in the guest house. I raised an eyebrow at Eleanor, who approached with Julian. The music school needs a new piano teacher, she said, and I need my family close. All of your family? I asked pointedly. She took my hand, especially the ones who showed me how to be better. The last notes of Malachi's song faded into silence. Outside, Boston's lights twinkled like stars, like promises kept, like truth finally set free. Play something else, Daddy, Hayden requested. Something happy. Malachi's fingers found a new melody, bright, hopeful, healing. Eleanor closed her eyes, swaying slightly, perhaps remembering a cafe where a musician with beautiful hands had once played just for her. Sometimes revenge doesn't look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like reconstruction, like a family pieced back together, stronger at the broken places. And sometimes I thought, as Julian pulled me onto the dance floor, it looks like forgiveness. The autumn wind rustled through the garden of the Thornton estate as I helped Hayden arrange chairs for her first public recital. Eleanor's guest house, now Malachi's home, had become a weekend music school for underprivileged children. More to the left, Eleanor called from the porch, fussing with program sheets. The sun will be in their eyes otherwise. Got it, Grandma. Hayden's energy had returned full force after her recovery. She dragged chairs with determined focus, her heart surgery scar barely visible under her concert dress. Julian emerged from the house carrying music stands. First student showcase, he said, grinning. Never thought I'd see the day. Never thought I'd see a lot of things, I replied, watching Eleanor help Malachi tune violins for his youngest students. The garden filled with families, some in designer clothes, others in their Sunday best, all here to support their children. Eleanor moved among them with easy grace, no longer concerned about social status or perfect appearances. Nervous? I asked Hayden as she peeked through the curtains we'd hung between trees. A little. She clutched her violin. What if I mess up? Then you'll keep playing, Malachi said, approaching with sheet music. Like I did, like your great-grandmother is learning to do. Eleanor joined us, smoothing Hayden's dress. I was thinking, she said, about expanding the music school. The east wing of the mansion is just sitting empty. Mother, Julian warned, one thing at a time. No, she's right, Malachi said. We have a waiting list. Kids who need this chance. I watched Eleanor's face soften. Kids like you needed a chance? Kids like all of us needed a chance, I said. To be seen, to be heard, to belong. The garden chairs were full now. Ashley signaled from the back. Time to start. Hayden took her place center stage, her small shoulders straight, Eleanor's determination written in every line of her body. She played the piece she'd composed herself, a conversation between violin and piano, with Malachi accompanying. The melody spoke of loss and finding, of broken things made whole, of second chances and fresh starts. I slipped my hand into Julian's as Eleanor wiped tears from her eyes. She's amazing, I whispered. They both are, he replied. All of them are. When the piece ended, Eleanor was the first to stand, applauding with unrestrained joy. The woman who had once cared only for perfect appearances was cheering loudly for her great-granddaughter, her carefully styled hair coming loose, her expensive mascara smeared with tears. The other students performed after Hayden, children who might never have touched an instrument if not for David's song foundation. Eleanor sat in the front row, beaming at each one as if they were her own grandchildren. After the recital, as families mingled over punch and cookies, Catherine approached our group. Eleanor, she said stiffly, the board members are concerned about the foundation's direction. Eleanor didn't even blink. Then they can find another charity to support. This is my family's legacy now. But the social implications are exactly what we need, I cut in. Or did you forget how it feels to be judged by your background? Catherine flushed and retreated. Eleanor squeezed my hand. You know, I never properly apologized for the gala. You didn't have to. You showed your apology through actions. Hayden ran up, clutching her violin. Daddy says we can play together at the Christmas concert. All of us. All of us? Eleanor asked. You too, Grandma, and Lucille. We can all learn something new. I laughed. I don't have a musical bone in my body. Neither did I, Eleanor admitted, until David taught me to dance. Malachi joined us, his student's violins tucked under his arm. Then maybe it's time for new lessons, for all of us. The autumn sun was setting, casting long shadows across the garden where society's barriers had finally crumbled, where music had built bridges stronger than blood or status. I have something for you, Eleanor said suddenly, pulling an envelope from her purse. Your juvenile records, the originals, no more copies exist. My hands shook as I took the envelope. How did you? I had Robert track them all down. No one will ever use them against you again. I stared at the papers that had haunted me for so long, then walked to the garden's fire pit. Without hesitation, I dropped them in. Good riddance, Julian said, wrapping his arm around me. We watched the papers burn as Hayden practiced her scales nearby, as Malachi and Ashley discussed the Christmas concert program, as Eleanor greeted more potential students and their parents without a single glance at their clothes or addresses. You know what's funny? I said to no one in particular. I came looking for revenge, but I found family instead. Eleanor smiled, her perfect mask long forgotten. Sometimes we find exactly what we need, even when we're looking for something else entirely. The papers finished burning, taking my past with them. But I didn't need to watch them disappear. I was too busy watching my future unfold in a garden full of music, second chances, and unconditional love. Some revenge stories end in destruction, but the best ones end in reconstruction, in healing, in hope, and in a garden full of music. That's exactly what we found.